So the last time we had an expansion, the card reveals came really slowly and then ramped up towards the end, towards the release date. That appears to not be the case this time. I thought that these videos were going to be a little more spaced out, but apparently I'm wrong. So not only are there more cards that have been revealed to talk about, but in fact there are so many I'm already going to have to split this next update into 2 different videos. So for this one we're going to cover 6 that have been revealed, and then I'm going to do another video in the next day or 2 that will cover the other 6, and then we're going to try to do these a little more often so that the videos don't end up being really long, because I'm sure that I'm going to go off on some rants or long-winded explanations for some of these. So yeah, without further ado, let's jump into the 6 that we're going to talk about for this video. Again, these are cards that have been revealed for the newest or most recently announced Elder Scrolls Legends expansion, Return to Clockwork City. So first up is Brasilisk. This card is a 10 out of 10 with the puns for names. I love it, but this card is a 3-cost endurance card. It is a 2/2 Fabricant, and when Brasilisk takes damage and survives, you summon a copy of it in the other lane. So this should naturally bring memories of Grim Patron if you have played Hearthstone. It's interesting. First thing that stands out is that this is a Fabricant that is not part of the common cycle. So previously were some cards revealed that were Fabricants, and they were all commons, and they had this summon effect that when you played it, if there was a neutral card in play, then they would get an ability, right? This is not part of that cycle, so this tells us that we are going to have Fabricants beyond just those 5 commons. But I think that this card is interesting for a number of reasons. First, the stat line isn't great. A 2/2 for 3 is pretty subpar, even with a really cool or potentially powerful ability like this. When you think of 3/3s, for 3, that's pretty common. When you think of things like Young Mammoth, a 4/4, that's even better. There are certainly a number of like 3/4s that get played. You think of things like Withered Hand Cultist. Even 2/2s for 3 do see play, but they usually have something like Ward and other amazing abilities a la Daggerfall Mage. The only other cards that are of similar stat line that do see play give you a very powerful effect, but also an immediate effect. So Thieves Guild Shadowfoot, for example, jumps out to me because that is a 2/2 for 3, but it potentially denies your opponent from hitting a prophecy if you're going to swing into them, and also generates card advantage. So Brasilisk has, at this stat line, a lot to live up to. And as of right now, with the way that the rules currently work and the tools that are currently available, I just don't think it's going to. There are some things to note. So first, unlike Hearthstone, this doesn't create exact copies of whatever that card is, right? So you're not going to get buffed up copies of Brasilisk. Also, there's no cards like in Hearthstone at the time of Grim Patron's dominance that, give everything on your board charge. So you're not going to get the insane like burst combo out of this card that you would have out of Grim Patron. The other thing is that this does have a limit on copies, because even if you do buff the health and then also find a way to reliably, ping your own creature, whether that's Rapid Shot, Skaven Pyromancer, Sharpshooter Scouts, whatever the case may be, you can only ever, at any one time make so many copies, because your board will fill up, right? It creates something in the other lane. So if you're talking about the original and you're pinging that, you can make up to 4 in the opposing lane if it was empty, and then you could start pinging those to make them go back. Where this could potentially see like an explosion on the board would be like playing 1, buffing the original, pinging it a couple of times to get 2 or 3 into the other lane, and then playing like Skaven Pyromancer to flood the other lane back. But ultimately, and this is the big problem, that's not really good enough, right? Like, even if you play this and you get immediate value, let's say you play this and you ping it. That's, you're paying 3 for a 4/4 of stats across 2 lanes, but it's really a 4/3 of stats because you had to ping the 1. So, you had to pay 3, do some work, and then you still only get a 4/3 with potential upside. No immediate board impact, as I said. Like I said, in the current meta and with the current cards revealed, feels weak. Now, that being said, we might see something that has a great interaction with Fabricants, for example. That could increase the value. We might find more tools that could either self-ping this, buff this, etc. That could increase the value. Obviously, this card goes up in value if you have things like, Divine Fervor in play, but the long-term payoff, again, in my mind, it just feels pretty weak. So while I don't think this card is going to rock the meta, it's certainly cheeky, it's fun. It's probably gonna, show up or have some people play this just the way that, after the Fall of the Dark Brotherhood came out, people were playing Skeevers. As we know now, not very impactful, not like a super amazing deck. You can make it work, sure, but it's not the sort of thing that was just dominating. That's exactly where I see Brasilisk. It'll show up in some memes. People will have fun with it. Has some potential maybe in Arena to get out of control, but in Constructed, the fact that it inherently not only doesn't even survive Ice Storm, but it doesn't even survive Firestorm, which has started to see a minor spike in play again because of all the token decks. I think that this is, kind of in a rough spot. So this one needs help. Otherwise, it's kind of cheeky fun, and that's where I view this one. So next up is Nyx Hound Fabricant. I apologize if the image looks grainy. These are cards that have been revealed, and so I've only got whatever images were revealed to work with. Some of them are better than others. But Nyx Hound Fabricant is part of the Fabricant cycle of commons. This one is a 4-cost 3/3, and it has Drain, and on summon, if it can spot a neutral card for you in play, right, a friendly neutral card, which I can say it has been verified by Americon, that does count supports, that does count items, etc. This one's summon effect is you shackle a creature in play. Now, well, an enemy creature, but I don't know why you would ever want to shackle your own. Yeah, so this card is sneaky good. I know that it doesn't seem on the surface as good as the other ones that have been revealed thus far because the stats feel lackluster. The willpower one, for example, if it triggers, you get a 6/6 because you get a 3/3 in each lane. The endurance one, you get an 8/8 for 5. That seems pretty good, right? So when you look at this and you're like, well, even if it triggers, I only ever get a 3/3 worth of stats, that can feel bad, right? However, the reason that I think that this one is sneaky good is because of those 3 that have been revealed so far, I think this one is the best to play even if you don't have the trigger, because you still get a 3/3 with Drain. And in the kinds of decks that you want to play this, which would be control-oriented, late-game oriented decks, Drain is useful. It will demand a response. It doesn't die to Firebolt like Werebat. Yes, it doesn't have Prophecy, but the 3 health will matter. I also kind of like that it's only 3 attack instead of 4 because it gives you a little more wiggle room before you're breaking runes, potentially. The 3 health means that it can potentially trade into creatures and survive a little bit better than Werebat. But the big part for me is the Shackle. So, yeah, you don't get a lot of stats here, but this is a very, very good tempo play. And if you think about the Shackle as life gain, right? If you shackle your opponent's 4/4, they're 5/5. This is a 4-cost, so if you shackle a Black Dragon, you shackle, a Young Mammoth, whatever the case may be, this is just like, playing a 3/3 for 4 that gained you 4 life, gained you 5 life. Going a step further, it might have also bought you time to find an answer to those cards. Going a step further, it locks it into place so that this could potentially trade into it, but, and this is the other reason I'm a big fan of this card, is this is not like the Spider. This does not shackle in the same lane. This can shackle cross lane. So yeah, you can, you know, drop this and shackle something with the intent to trade into it, but if they have, you know, dominant control of the field lane, for example, you can drop this in the shadow lane, still shackle cross lane to slow them down, have your drain creature ready to go, and then use some sort of either you know, AoE or removal or some other effect on the field lane to potentially deal with them, right? So if you think about like a control monk deck that might be, you know, trying to push for one lane or the other to Dawn's Wrath the other side, this card fits great into that strategy. I think this card is sneaky good. I think that it's much better than it looks. It's easy to see those other ones in those big gaudy numbers and think that they're way better, but I think that this card is on the cusp of being very, very good. Now, the things that hurt it right now, and I say right now, we got a lot of reveals yet to cover and so on and so forth, but the aggressive fabricants tend to, at least as of right now, already have neutral cards that you would want to play, thus making them easier to get the summon effect. It's pretty easy, for example, to just slap Lurking Crocodile into something because the card has Prophecy. It's a 3/2 for 2. You know, it's aggressive, it's going to potentially be on the board, and then, you know, you can play your other Fabricant and trigger it. For control decks, I mean, you can play something like Night Mother, maybe other supports if they show up, but for the most part, at least as of right now, with what's been revealed and so forth, it's harder to find that neutral card that you want to play in a control deck that you would play and then get the summon effect. So that's the only thing holding this card back in my mind. I think that the Drain is great and the Shackle is great. It just needs a reliable way to trigger, and then you've got yourself a really good card on your hands. That's just going to be the caveat. Like the neutral cards that control usually runs are actions, right? Like you run Crushing Blow, but creature-wise, or, you know, even support-wise or item-wise, it's been a little more barren. So I'm kind of curious to see both what this set brings and what people are willing to do to get the full power out of this card. Because like I said, I think that the effect is very powerful. It's just, you got to get to where you can reliably trigger it. So this one I would say is good, on the cusp of great, pending some more reliable ways to trigger it, right? Keep an eye out for that. I think this card could be amazing in Arena as well. Again, if you have ways to trigger it, it's going to end up being a very, very good tempo play, so that's a thing. But yeah, pay close attention to your 0 to 3 cost neutral cards that get revealed and come into play in the meta, because that's going to be ultimately what determines this card's like full potential. Yeah, that's Nixhound Fabricant. Next up is Phalanx Exemplar, and this card I'm a big fan of. I think this card is very, very good in mid-range decks. Now, this is a 5-cost 5/6 Willpower Imperial. It has Guard, and it also has fun text that when your opponent draws a Prophecy card from a rune being destroyed, you add one of the Septim Guardsmen to your hand, and that's the 0-cost 1/2 with Guard. This card obviously draws comparisons to Dark Guardian. I apologize, I probably stuttered there. Draws comparisons to Dark Guardian. Dark Guardian is definitely a control tool. I know it was played in some mid-range decks to kind of help you take control of the field lane, and that's entirely fine, but for the most part, Dark Guardian is utilized more in control. This card, I think, is a trap for control. I'm not saying that you can't use it, but I think that this stat line is far better for mid-range, and I think that you're, one, more likely to get value out of the Prophecy side, but even if you don't, quite honestly, I think that a 5/6 Guard for 5 is just good enough for many mid-range decks. The 6 health is not trivial. There are a lot of things with 5 attack, so making them have to go, you know, even just a little bit more. Not saying that they can't. There's plenty of ways that people can sneak in one more damage, but making somebody go the extra mile to deal with this is great. It's a very quality statted card for the cost. It definitely, in my opinion, speaks more to an aggressive game plan where, you know, you're playing something on 2, on 3, on 4, and then you're maybe playing this to protect those creatures, saying, okay, you know, crash into this guy, give me the 2-for-1, and you still don't deal with the lane. Maybe this guy helps you split, right? So if you've got a little bit of a presence in the field lane, maybe for your 4-drop you drop Murkwater Shaman into the shadow lane, and then this guy comes the turn after, and now you've got this great split presence. The guard on this means he protects the shaman, but he's also a beast in and of himself. There's enough good 4-drops in the game that following those up with something like this can feel really good. Or, you know, if you take it a step further, you could think of like Spellsword in mid-range, right? Spellsword in mid-range could give you some really quality big creatures on curve. You know, you might open with something that's not the greatest, something like Windkeep Spellsword, and don't get me wrong, that card is great. I just mean, like, stat-wise, that's obviously you're paying for the ward. But then after that, you could go like Young Mammoth into like Hive Defender or Black Dragon, into a Phalanx Exemplar, and then even at 6, while it's the same stat line, if you play something like Wrath of Sithis, you're getting yet another 5/6 while also slowing them down, and then into like Bone Daddy. I could see this card fitting very well in mid-range Spellsword. I could see it fitting very well in mid-range Monk. Basically, like willpower mid-rangey lists, I think, can benefit from this card. I mean, the reason I don't see this going into control is because a guard just isn't good enough. You need it to do something else. Hive Defender is still really good, but it's good because of the stats you get as well. But it's kind of like, you know, the days are gone where you would just play a guard and that would give you like a 2-for-1 in value because people are crashing their creatures into it. Everybody has answers now. There's, you know, anything from going around the guard to moving to another lane to just plain blowing it up. Like a guard for control is oftentimes just not a reactive enough play. You need your guards to do something else. I think that's why Knight of the Hour is so good, because you get a guard that, you know, yeah, it's a speed bump, but you also gained health from it, and you have the chance to get it off of a prophecy. So when you're thinking about like 5-drops in control, I would personally still run Knight of the Hour over this. But in mid-range, I think this card is a house. So I'm a big fan. I think the only thing that will hold this back is honestly how viable those willpower mid-range decks will be. So, you know, Spellsword, Crusader, Monk, etc., right? If those end up getting the right tools to be played and be good, I think you will see this card also see play. It definitely has a place in those decks. So, yeah, I'm a fan of this one. Next up, we have Hunter Killers. This is a 7-cost Fabricant that is not part of the common cycle. It's a 3/4, but has a very interesting summon effect. When it comes into play, it battles an enemy creature, and then it battles another enemy creature. This card is, I think, potentially really good in Arena, and has potential in Constructed, but not a lot because of the setup required. The big thing here is the stat line, right? In order to battle the second creature, it has to survive the first battle. So while this card does potentially give strength like a 2-for-1 or the potential for a 3-for-1, you got to think about realistic scenarios, right? When you play this and it battles the first creature, you're hoping that it's battling like a 3/3 or less, basically, so that it survives and can battle the second creature. But if it battles the second creature at that point, like, it's going to die to that. Creates a 2-for-1, sure, but it's costing you 7, right? And let's be honest, if you're paying 7 in strength for a control tool, you're going to be compared against Unstoppable Rage. It's the same reason Duel Atop the Worlds just doesn't see play. It's because why play that when you can play Unstoppable Rage? If you're playing a controlled deck, You also have to consider other removal tools in the same cost range, right? So like if you're playing Crusader Control, why would you run this over, let's say, Unstoppable Rage or Dawn's Wrath? Battle Mage Control, again, you've got like Ice Storm the turn below it. So it's got a lot of competition. Basically, this card needs things like Rothgar Forge to be good, because it gets really good when it gives you the 3-for-1. And the 3-for-1 is when it battles and kills a creature, and then also stays on the board. At that point, it's worth the cost. You've generated enough value. But in order to do that, it needs a way to survive. So it needs something like Rothgar Forge and getting a good item when it hits play. It needs something like World Eater's Eyrie, because that actually would, pump this guy. Whether or not like that's enough, I don't know. There's an awful lot of support removal floating around in the current meta, and if somebody plays World Eater's Eyrie, that should be like a hint that they're trying to utilize that card, and it should be promptly dealt with. Lucian Lachance, right? Giving this thing Slay so that it battles and gets bigger, and then battles and gets bigger. That could potentially work. I just honestly feel like the biggest knock is just everything else that currently exists at 7. Whether or not this is better than even Duel Atop the Worlds, I don't know. Let alone Unstoppable Rage. Is it even better than the Dragon that's a 7/3 that battles, right? Because at least that one you're potentially taking out a big creature, whereas this, by the time you're playing a 7 cost, you gotta hope that they even have small things on the board, right? Like this could potentially enter play, be forced to battle an enemy creature, and not even be able to win that battle, because of the 3/4 stat line. So I think this one is very much in the same boat that Brasilisk is, in that it needs help before you're going to see any value out of it. Otherwise, it'll show up in, some memes here or there, right? Some silly decks, some fun try-and combos, but there are just other tools that I think outshine it currently with the way that the current meta is. Again, just like Brasilisk, if we get some card that like turbo pumps Fabricants or something, then we might revisit this card, and it might actually end up being really, really good because the effect is powerful, but the stat line really holds it back. So that's all I have to say about Hunter Killers, unfortunately. Next up is Clockwork Dragon. Now, Clockwork Dragon is a 5-cost neutral. It is a dragon. It is a 4/4, and it has a very cool summon effect. When it's summoned, if it's in the left lane, it gets +2/+0 in Drain, and otherwise, it gets +0/+2 in Guard. Now, this is an interesting card because it's in neutral. A 5-cost for a 4/6 guard in the Shadow Lane isn't great, but there's a lot of decks that might benefit from that may not have had the option, and certainly there are a lot of decks that can potentially benefit from the Drain side of things. I immediately think of things like Battle Mage, for example. Battle Mage just doesn't have great inherent health gain. Like, you might be able to run Dark Harvester or some silly things like that, but doesn't really have access to Drain or a lot of burst healing, things like that. But this card potentially gives them access to Drain. Now, you have to have control of the field lane, and ideally you want to pair this with something like Night Mother so that you don't have to break runes, right? Gaining health to stabilize doesn't really help a whole lot if you're giving your opponent a bunch of gas. But the other nice thing, or at least the thing that stands out, is it costs 5. So in theory, if the game goes long enough and you need to blow up the field lane, this is a great target for Unstoppable Rage in Battle Mage. Not that you couldn't put it in other decks, right? But it doesn't require ramp, right? So 5+7 is 12. You can slap it into the field lane and Unstoppable Rage and potentially wipe it and Drain for 6 times whatever you hit. But obviously it doesn't help you if they're loaded up in the Shadow Lane. So I don't know, this card's going to be interesting because if it starts seeing play, it's going to change the way that people think about lane placement, and it's going to really complicate games. Because specifically, when I think about Unstoppable Rage, normally there you want to be in the field lane, you want to control it, because you want to be able to react to whatever they play before they can Unstoppable Rage. But if you do that but you're not able to finish them before they hit the 12 Magicka, then you may want to abandon to the Shadow Lane, even though it gives you less ability to trade into whatever they play, right? It might open up like weird Wild of Hircine, or Child of Hircine shenanigans, excuse me, not Wild of Hircine. Yeah, there's going to be this weird, like, interesting dynamic. Ultimately, I feel like this card is good, not great, because of how conditional it is. I think that it can be a great filler for decks that are just missing that guard or missing that drain, but because of the lane placement limitations, it might not be good enough to see play, or if it does see play, it might not be effective every time, right? Yeah, I don't know how else to put it. People will know that it's coming and potentially play around it if it does see a lot of play, right? When you think about like proliferation through the meta, I think where this card potentially shines is in a meta where decks aren't necessarily always auto-including it, right? When it can catch people by surprise and then you can actually get the value out of the drain or get the value out of the guard that you're hoping to get, because if it's ubiquitous, then playing around it becomes easy because you know that it's there and you can lane place appropriately. And if it's not ubiquitous, then you force people to make decisions and you might be able to benefit from it. So it's kind of an interesting card in that respect. Again, as I said, I think that this is good, not great. I think it might help fill some holes. The good news is I don't see it being ubiquitous. I don't think every control deck is going to want to run this. I think it's going to be some very class-specific cases where you're trying to take advantage of something that you might not have in your class, right? That's usually the way the neutrals work. They try to shore up, you know, what you might be missing. So, yeah, Clockwork Dragon. And the last card I'm going to go over in this video is Galen the Shelterer. This is a 3-cost Endurance Dark Elf. It is a unique legend. It has a 3/3 stat line for the 3, which is not too shabby, and is a very interesting summon effect. So, on summon, you choose a creature or item in your hand. You shuffle 3 copies of it with +3/+3 into your deck. So this is Ungolem, but instead of just giving you assassins, you pick, but it has to be something in your hand, and then you have to draw it to get the value. Now, I actually think that this card is interesting and potentially really good in control decks and some mid-range. In aggressive decks, this card I think is just going to be too slow. You're only getting a 3/3 for 3. It doesn't do anything when it immediately hits the board, and then you're hoping to draw a creature or an item that you have buffed. Now, I don't know about you, but when I'm playing an aggressive deck, I don't want to be banking off potential draws that I may or may not see. You know, even if I throw this on something with charge, which I think would be the best use of this in an aggressive deck, you're still stuck waiting, and it may never come. As somebody who's played Ungolem and then never seen an assassin more times than I can count, I would not want this to happen to me in an aggressive deck. So I think that it's not great there, but I do see potential in mid-range and certainly in control, and I think that it shines best actually on cheap items or creatures that cycle. Like, I would feel great about throwing this on onto the board and then playing the effect on Enchanted Plate, right? So Enchanted Plate, the 3 copies would then be +3/+6 on a creature and still cycle to draw a card. Fantastic. Similarly, Thieves Guild Recruit, right? You throw this on a Thieves Guild Recruit, and now they are 4/5s that still draw you a card. Perfect. But throwing this on, I don't know, like Tazcad might seem cheeky, and it certainly might win you some games, but I don't think that it's necessarily going to be the best value, because when you draw that other Tazcad, it's, you know, how much better is drawing that Tazcad going to be better than drawing your first Tazcad that you already have in your hand? Because that's the key, right? When you play this, you're choosing something in your hand. So if I already have Tazcad in my hand and I shuffle 3 more Tazcads in, you know, why am I not winning the game with the first Tazcad? I think that this is, again, this is my own personal choice or personal preference, but I think that this is best on, you know, cheap or like mid-range creatures or items, I think that this is best on cheap creatures or maybe even some mid-range creatures, but specifically ones that replace themselves or cycle, because you want to be digging through your deck to find the other copies, and you're going to get, I think, the best value, again, out of those Thieves Guild recruits, Enchanted Plates. Even cards like Elusive Schemer, I think, are fine, because you would be playing them anyway to just cycle, but now that you're buffing them, you're not just cycling them, you're cycling and getting value, right? It's like that in addition to, whereas if you, let's say you put this on a Hive Defender, right? Hive Defender was a big wall. It's still a big wall with Galen. It doesn't do anything extra, right? If Hive Defender was good before, it's going to be just as good. Yeah, I think that this is personally best used to enhance some of your lackluster creatures or lackluster plays that would have been used for thinning or consistency that let you cycle through, rifle through your deck, etc., etc. So that being said, I could be entirely wrong. There are plenty of ways to use this. Oh, I do want to point out one other way that I think it could be great. That's altar decks. The first thing I thought of when I saw this were decks that utilize Endurance and Altar of Despair, because you're more likely to hit your buffed versions of things in those scenarios, right? You play Galen, put it on, you know, one of the creatures in your hand, shuffle in 3 copies, then you start using Altar, and when you get to whatever that cost is, hopefully you're hitting one of your buffed ones. So certainly has a place in Altar decks. There's not a lot of Altar decks that run Endurance right now. Maybe that changes, but it does have a place potentially there as well. But to me, I think that it's more like mid-range and control-oriented decks or matchups, and specifically those where you're, you know, hopefully playing creatures or items that have a, you know, replacement effect, right? Like you play them and then you draw a card, or, you know, again, those things that were marginal value that you were using to cycle through, but now actually give you significant value and still do what they were intending to do. I think that's the best use of this card. Yeah, I think this one is the most intriguing of the ones I'm talking about in this video, so I'm curious to hear what you guys think. I've been paying attention to the message boards. A lot of people seem to like this card and some of the other ones, but as always, I would like to know what you think. Let me know if I'm off base, if I'm on target, if you have thought about cool combos that I didn't mention in the video. Share them. As always, I love you guys, and that's it for this video, so until next time, may you walk on warm sands.